Hi, I'm Simon Ford, and welcome to Psycho Killer. The way the Metropolitan Police investigates unexplained deaths is to change as a result of failings in the investigation into the serial killer Stephen-Port. We examined his crimes and the bungled investigation in our podcast Stephen-Port, the grindr-killer. Port murdered 4 men between 2014 and 2015, as well as committing multiple rapes. In 2016, he was given a life sentence with a whole life order, meaning he'll spend the rest of his life behind bars. Jacques Morrell, hello. You spent 30 years in the police, 10 of them as a homicide detective and on major crime task forces. Just explain for me, please, what changes are the Met making exactly?
Hi, Simon. It seems that the Met have created a new policy relating to the investigation of sudden deaths. And in that, they're creating 4 new categories that will be made and will apparently provide absolute clarity to officers. Now, from what I've seen, the 4 distinct categories will be as follows. Expected deaths. Now, that's where deaths are expected by a terminal disease or medical diagnosis. Now, these are not normally investigated by the police anyway, other than a basic report to the coroner. And I think even now the ambulance service can also submit sudden death reports to that level. And it then moves on to unexpected deaths that are investigated but not suspicious. And that will be for those where evidence shows no third-party involvement. They will then categorise unexpected deaths under investigation. That means that further inquiries are needed. And then the 4th one will be homicide, where clearly we have an unlawful killing and that somebody else was involved.
And these changes are in response to what investigative failings?
Well, as you said, Simon, this Stephen-Port case identified to me that a series of unusual, unexplained deaths, they can, in certain circumstances, be dealt with in isolation and opportunities missed if they are linked. Now, local investigators dealt with each of those cases that you mentioned, and they did so sufficiently to satisfy the coroner on each occasion. They did try a referral to their major crime investigators who deal with homicides, but of course they didn't take the cases on because they weren't identified as homicides until the 4th death.
Jack, as an experienced copper, what's your impression of the new procedures? Will they actually make a difference in practice?
Well, the truth, we'll see about that. But the key category for me is that one that I mentioned, the unexpected death under investigation, meaning further inquiries are needed. Now, I suppose that with the 4 victims that were given fatal doses of GHB by Stephen-Port, this categorization of the incident, the case, it would have meant that the investigators had to keep asking questions. But, let's go back to the point that I think we made quite clearly in our earlier episode. It all depends on the level of supervision and management that these criminal investigators have. When the workload is as incessant as it can be, and the workforce spread ever more thinly, errors will happen. So, in theory, yes, it will kickstart and ask questions about the overall investigation. But would it mean it will never happen again? We never know, do we?
Port earned the name grindr-killer for the way he scouted his victims on the gay dating app. The case prompted members of Parliament to call for a public inquiry into claims of institutional homophobia in the Met, echoing accusations that had been made by the victims' families. They claimed that police prejudice played a part in the botched investigations. Do the new procedures address those concerns?
From what I've seen, I would doubt it. The review didn't, I believe, support the notion that homophobia was a factor. I'm sure that the crime investigators will have already learnt some harsh lessons from the inquest and review of the case. I noted that during the period of the deaths of these 4 gay men, The inspector held a meeting but didn't invite or strike up a communication with the LGBT community. With hindsight, yes, that would have been a good idea. But would it have changed anything? I'm not sure it would.
Now, the new procedures are to be adopted by London's Metropolitan Police, by far the largest force in the country. Do you expect other forces in England to follow suit?
Oh, almost certainly. The policy will change the way that incidents are recorded, and it will focus the minds of the detective sergeants and the detective inspectors all over the country. The problem remains, though. It's difficult to do more with less. Let me give you an idea. Since 2010, there's been a chronic underfunding of the police, and the service has lost far too many experienced officers. During those early austerity cutbacks, they went so deep that some forces even made experienced and capable officers retire under the guise of efficiency savings. And this was followed by a whole tranche of officers retiring after 30 years around 2015. And that all came back to the miners' strike of the early 80s, when there was a hold on recruitment, and then they recruited a whole tranche of officers later. So the police service is very, very thinly spread around at the moment, and you can't do more with less, I'm afraid.
Jack, thanks so much for your insight. We'll be keeping a watchful eye out for more developments, and we'll bring them to you on Psycho Killer, the podcast for true crime addicts everywhere.